Sully, run the video. Bastion was, without a doubt, the biggest reveal of the Season of Dawn. Right before Trials of Osiris, of course. God forbid we forget about that. Now, I've actually had this gun since the day after it launched, but I decided it was likely better that I wait and really sit on this script before I release it. Reason being is because Bastion is an extremely unique gun, and we'll talk about why that is here in just a second. Before I forget, if you're enjoying the channel so far, I am 100% willing to kiss anybody who subscribes straight on the lips. I have no shame. Getting back to the whole topic of the video here, Bungie did a fantastic job balancing out this gun, specifically because the amount of damage it's capable of dishing out without the external aid of a damage buff or a target debuff is extremely high when you take into account the amount of rounds it can send down range. And the fact that each round is technically 3 individual rounds that each deal 1/3 of the gun's total damage value per shot. This makes for a very interesting rendition of the classic fusion rifle that everyone else has come to love while I learned how to hate over the years, up until recently, of course. So in terms of stats, this is actually a very well-rounded rifle that can deal extremely large amounts of damage in a very short amount of time. It has an impact of 85, a range of 42, a stability of 57, handling of 39, and honestly the rest of the stats really don't matter here, save for reload speed, which isn't abysmally slow, but it's also not the fastest thing I've ever seen in my life. That can very easily be fixed by double stacking enhanced rifle loader mods or certain abilities like Lightning Weave, just to name one or two. So yeah, not really an issue, not even by a long shot. What makes this gun so interesting is that it's a fusion rifle with the firing mechanic of a pulse rifle. Obviously a very, very high impact pulse rifle, but I'm talking more about the burst fire mechanic than anything else. 3 rounds go out with each charge, even though the magazine only consumes a single round. It's an interesting gimmick, one that I would very much like to see more of. The biggest issue that this weapon has, though, is that while it is a mid-range weapon, the spread on the rounds that go down range is exceedingly high, making anything other than close quarters combat virtually impossible in any way. So, mid-range? Yeah, sure. Long range? Might as well just start throwing rocks at him because you got a higher chance of hitting your target like that. It's not really a gripe as much as it is just an observation, seeing that it is kind of a fusion rifle, and while there are a few that can be bent into whatever shape the user desires, the majority of them cannot. This isn't necessarily a bad thing either. It's a good balancing mechanic. High damage, close range. If you have the right perk setup, you can bolster that reload speed and the gun becomes extremely lethal to any sort of boss target in the game, be it in the shared world or in some instanced activity like a raid or a nightmare boss. In the time that I've spent with Bastion, one thing has become exceedingly clear to me, and that is that this gun needs a damage buff. And no, I'm not saying that it doesn't hit hard enough because it deals astounding damage right off the bat. Rather, what I'm saying is that it's way more fun to use it when you have an external buff going. If you're a hunter, run Middle Tree Night Stalker. Flawless execution applies a percentage debuff on targets which significantly lowers overall TTK. This effect can be increased even more if you take advantage of Khepri Sting, so every time you trigger Flawless Execution, you also trigger Corrosive Smoke. It's a small increase, but it's an increase nonetheless. Shadow Shot also applies a debuff, so if you're not comfortable with Middle Tree, you can use either Top or Bottom Tree for the same effect. If you're a Titan, well, Melting Point, just Melting Point. It breaks everything. If you have the right mod setup, you can Melting Point over and over and over, constantly critting with Bastion on everything that you see, assuming it doesn't die when it takes a kneecap to the chin. If you're a Warlock, you can trigger Guiding Flame. While this doesn't cause any active crit bonuses, it does increase overall damage output, though it's not nearly as effective as something like Melting Point or Shadow Shot Tether. As with the last debuff, this significantly decreases overall TTK. Now, to see if I could run it through its paces, I took Bastion into a few different high-level instances to see what it's really capable of, and believe it or not, I actually walked out of there with a significantly different mentality than I originally expected, albeit I came out of there battered and bruised because I, as a player, just kind of suck. Like I've said a dozen times now, this thing was made for massive damage. Damage over time is great and all, but it's a whole different feeling when you can physically see the chunks falling off of enemy health bars. Its lower ammo reserves make it one of those guns that you'll want to use sparingly, as to save it for when it's really, really needed, but that's the fun of it, because when it's in your hands, it feels like you're legitimately hurling boulders at your targets, except that those boulders are on fire. The thing about Bastion is that it's one of those guns that excels at nearly everything, save for any form of long-range shooting like I mentioned earlier. Its damage output is high enough for the player to hold their own without the assistance of some sort of damage buff, though it's far more enjoyable. So, I love it. I absolutely love this gun. I cannot get enough of it. If I'm being real here, I literally have zero issues with this gun. Like, at all. None. Zero. This gun, at least to me, is 100% perfection. If you haven't already had a chance to pick this thing up, stop what you're doing and go finish the quest. Yes, it's tedious, but it's also worth it. That about wraps this one up, guys, so feel free to leave a like, a comment, some sort of debilitating insult, you know the drill. And if you liked this video, don't forget that you can also subscribe for more content just like this. Either way, I'll see you all later, you beautiful damn people, you. Jayboy out.